Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together in community of Torah so that we can both open our books, read words of Torah, and engage one another in relationships of Torah, and thereby bring greater Torah out into the world. We are in Parshat Mishpatim in the book of Exodus, which you can find beginning on chapter 21 with verse 1. I'd like to invite everyone to go ahead at this point, if you'd like to unmute, and together we can recite our blessing for the opportunity of studying together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity of coming together, reading words of Torah, sharing insights with one another, Torah, and engaging in relationships of Torah. With that, I'd like to invite everyone to once again mute, and I will begin by sharing the opening verses of our Torah portion, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. So once again, Exodus chapter 21, verse 1. These are the rules that you shall set before them. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. In the 7th year, he shall go free without payment. If he came single, he shall leave single. If he had a wife, his wife shall leave with him. If his master gave him a wife, and she has borne him children, the wife and her children shall belong to the master, and he shall leave alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master, and my wife and children I do not wish to go free, his master shall take him before God. He shall be brought to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall then remain his slave for life. Margo, would you like to read a little bit there, beginning at verse 7?
What did you call?
Margo, would you like to read
Okay.
beginning at verse 7?
Oh, surely. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not be freed as male slaves are. If she proves to be displeasing to her master, who designated her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He shall not have the right to sell her to outsiders, since he broke faith with her. And if he designated her for his son, he shall deal with her as is the practice with free maidens. If he marries another, he must not withhold from the one her food, her clothing, or must not withhold from this one her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he fails her in these three ways, she shall go free without payment.
Thank you, Margo. Ruth, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 12?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. One who fatally strikes another person shall be put to death. If a male killer did not do it by design, but it came about by an act of God, I will assign you a place to which he can flee. When a person schemes against another and kills through treachery, you shall take that person from my very altar to be put to death. One who strikes one's father or mother shall be put to death. One who kidnaps a person, whether having sold or still holding the victim, shall be put to death. One who insults one's father or mother shall be put to death. Okay. Do you want me to keep on going?
I'm going to invite Jim to go ahead. And Jim, would you like to read beginning there at verse 18?
Yes, thank you. When men quarrel and one strikes the other with stone or fist, and he does not die, but has to take to his bed, if he then gets up and walks outdoors upon his staff, the assailant shall go unpunished, except that he must pay for his idleness and his cure. When a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and he dies there and then, he must be avenged. But if he survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, since he is the other's property. When men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact from him, the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. When a man strikes the eye of his slave, male or female, and destroys it, he shall let him go free on account of his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, he shall let him go free on account of his tooth. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox is not to be punished. If, however, that ox has been in the habit of goring, and its owner, though warned, has failed to guard it, and kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner too shall be put to death. If ransom is laid upon him, he must pay whatever is laid upon him to redeem his life. So too, if it gores a minor, male or female, the owner shall be dealt with according to the same rule. But if the ox gores a slave, male or female, he shall pay 30 shekels of silver to the master, and the ox shall be stoned.
Thank you, Jim. Let me invite Gary. Would you like to pick up at verse 33?
When a person opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or an ass falls into it, the one responsible for the pit must make restitution, paying the price to the owner, but keeping the dead animal. When a person's ox injures a neighbor's ox and it dies, they shall sell the live ox and divide its price, and they shall divide the dead animal. If, however, it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring and its owner has failed to guard it, that person must restore ox for ox, but shall keep the dead animal. When a person steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, that person shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. If the thief is seized while tunneling and beaten to death, there is no blood guilt in that case. If the sun had already risen, there is blood guilt in that case. The thief must make restitution, and if lacking the means, shall be sold for the theft. But if what was stolen, whether ox or ass or sheep, is found alive and in hand, that person shall pay double.
Thank you, Gary. Steve, would you like to read beginning at verse 4?
Yes, thank you. When a person who owns livestock lets it loose to graze in another's land, and so allows a field or a vineyard to be grazed bare, restitution must be made for the impairment of that field or vineyard. When a fire is started and spreads to thorns, so that stacked, standing, or growing grain is consumed, the one who started the fire must make restitution. When a person gives money or goods to another for safekeeping, and they are stolen from that other person's house, if caught, the thief shall pay double. If the thief is not caught, the owner of the house shall dispose before God and deny laying hands on the other's property. In all charges of misappropriation pertaining to an ox, an ass, a sheep, a garment, or any other loss, whereof one party alleges, this is it, the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God declares guilty shall pay double to the other.
Thank you, Steve. Let me invite Richard. Would you like to read beginning at verse 9?
Yes, thank you. When a man gives to another an ass, an ox, a sheep, of any other animal to guard, and it, quote, dies of injuries, end quote, or is carried off with no witness about, an oath before the Lord shall decide between the two of them that the one has not laid hands on the property of the other. The owner must acquiesce, and no restitution shall be made. But if the animal was stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it was torn by beasts, he shall bring it as evidence. He need not replace what has been torn by beasts. When a man borrows an animal from another and it dies of injuries, the owner not being with it, he must make restitution. If its owner was with it, no restitution need be made. But if it was hired, he is still entitled to the hiring fee. If a man seduces a virgin who has not been spoken for and lies with her, he must make her his wife by payment of a bride price. If her father refuses to give her to him, he must still weigh out several in proportion to the bride price for a virgin. You shall not tolerate a sorceress. Whoever lies with a beast shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to a god, other than the Lord alone, shall be proscribed. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me, and my anger shall blaze forth, and I will put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows, and your children orphans.
Wow, thank you, Richard. Martine, would you like to read beginning there at verse 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, do not act toward them as a creditor. Exact no interest from them. If you take your neighbor's garment in pledge, you must return it before the sun sets. It is the only available clothing. It is what covers the skin. In what else shall your neighbor sleep? Therefore, if that person cries out to me, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate. You shall not revile God, nor put a curse upon a chieftain among your people. You shall not put off the skimming of the first yield of your vats. You shall give me the male firstborn among your children. You shall do the same with your cattle and your flocks. 7 days it shall remain with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. You shall be a holy people to me. You must not eat flesh torn by beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs.
Thank you, Martine. Let me invite Mark Thompson. Would you like to read the start of chapter 23?
Thank you. You must not carry false rumors. You shall not join hands with the guilty to act as a malicious witness. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute so as to pervert it in favor of the mighty. Nor shall you show deference to a poor man in his dispute. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back to him. When you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. You shall not subvert the rights of your needy in their disputes. Keep far from a false charge. Do not bring death on those who are innocent and in the right, for I will not acquit the wrongdoer. Do not take bribes, for bribes blind the clear-sighted and upset the pleas of those who are in the right. Shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt.
Thank you, Mark. Susan and David, would you like to pick up beginning at verse 10?
Yes, thank you very much. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield, but in the 7th you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Let the needy among your people eat of it, and what they leave let the wild beasts eat. You shall do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall cease from labor, in order that your ox and your ass may rest, and that your homeborn slave and the stranger may be refreshed.
Let me read yours, point. Be on guard concerning all that I've told you. Make no mention of the names of other gods. They shall not be heard on your lips. 3 times a year you shall hold a festival for me. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread eating unleavened bread for 7 days, as I have commanded you, at the set time in the month of Abib. For in it you went forth from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. And the feast of the harvest of the first fruits of your work, of what you sow in the field, and the feast of the ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the results of your work from the field. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the sovereign Hashem. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, and the fat of my festal offering shall not be left lying until morning. The choice first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of your God, Hashem. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk.
Thank you both so much. Sherry, are you interested in reading a little bit, beginning at verse 20?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sending an angel before you to guard you on the way and bring you to the place that I have made ready. Pay heed to him and obey him. Do not defy him, for he will not pardon your offenses, since my name is in him. But if you obey him and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. When my angel goes before you and brings you to the Amorites, the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Canaanites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will annihilate them. And you shall not bow down to their gods in worship or follow their practices, but you shall tear them down and smash their pillars to bits. You shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water. And I will remove sickness from your midst. No woman in your land shall miscarry or be barren. I will let you enjoy the full count of your days.
Thank you, Sherry. Let me invite Justin. Would you like to read beginning at verse 27?
I will send my fear before you, and I will confuse all the people among whom you shall come. And I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will send the Tzirah before you, and it will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. I will not drive them away from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field outnumber you. I will drive them out before you little by little, until you have increased and can occupy the land. And I will make your boundary from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the desert to the river. Deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hands, and you shall drive them out from before you. You shall not form a covenant for them or for their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me, that you will worship their gods, which will be a snare for you.
Thank you, Justin. We're now beginning with chapter 24. Then God said to Moses, "Come up to the Eternal with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and bow low from afar. Moses alone shall come near Adonai, but the others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him." Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of Adonai and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice, saying, "All the things that Adonai has commanded, we will do." Moses then wrote down all the commands of Adonai. Early in the morning, he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He designated some young men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls as offerings of well-being to Adonai. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people. And they said, All that Adonai has spoken, we will faithfully do. Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people and said, this is the blood of the covenant that Adonai now makes with you concerning all these commandments. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. Under God's feet there was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. God did not raise God's hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. Margot, would you like to continue reading there at verse 12?
Sure. The Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the stone. I will give you the stone tablets with the teachings and the commandments which I have inscribed to instruct them. So Moses and his attendant Joshua arose, and Moses ascended the mountain to God. To the elders he had said, wait here for us until we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone who has a legal matter approach them. When Moses had ascended the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain. The presence of the Lord abode on Mount Sinai, and the cloud hid it for 6 days. On the 7th day, he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. Now the presence of the Lord appeared in the sight of the Israelites as a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain, and Moses remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights.
Thank you. That's our entire Torah portion for this week. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in the reading. I'd like to share with you a little bit of a focus study, and then I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts and comments about this week's Torah portion. So to begin with, if you have a copy of the study sheet that was posted on our Facebook page and that was emailed out to those who requested a copy, I'd like to focus first on this painting that's at the very top of the study sheet. It's an oil painting by a woman named Ruth Feldman. And Ruth Feldman is actually a Jewish educator, I believe, in Philadelphia. In addition to her profession as a Jewish educator, she has also become a very prolific artist. And I actually encourage you to seek her out online and look at her art gallery and the beautiful works that she's done. I picked this particular painting out from all of the many works that she's done called Layers of Creation, because both the painting itself and her little bit of commentary about her work gets at something that we're going to be exploring during this bit of focus study. Let me share with you what she herself writes about her work. She writes, I paint not what I see, but rather what I don't see. I think of my paintings as metaphor, new layers of meaning, inspired or evoked by the words of classical Jewish texts. I am attempting to offer a visual response, a new medium for metaphor to get at other dimensions of meaning concealed within the word. We're going to explore a little bit about what I think Ruth Feldman, both in her work and her writing here, is getting at about meanings that are concealed within the words to try and access dimensions and release dimensions that are compacted perhaps in these very finite symbols that we call words. And this week's Torah portion study is entitled To Imbue Old Forms with New Meaning. And the person who gets us started on this path in terms of commentary about, in a sense, looking at an old form and discovering new meaning there is perhaps the most classical of all of our commentators, and that's Rashi. And Rashi is going to do something quite provocative, quite disruptive to the flow of the narrative story, which seems like a very straightforward story about being there at Sinai, and then being at Mount Sinai, the revelation, which we've already read about in Parshat Yitro, the giving of Torah. And then it seems as if all that flows from there in this week's Torah portion and beyond are kind of more details about the laws that are being revealed by God and passed by God onto the Israelite people. Rashi is going to do something quite confounding. And through this act of provocation, we're going to uncover something quite profound, I think, about what Rashi and other commentators say about human nature and the acquisition of new insights. So here, number one on the study sheet, Rashi quotes from our Torah portion at the very beginning of the chapter that we just read, chapter 24. And Moses said to God, and Rashi says this passage was said before the 10 utterances, the 10 commandments. And then on the 4th of Sivan, he was told, come up to God. What Rashi seems to be saying here is, you think that this is a chronological flow of narrative, that what the Torah is doing is presenting the order of the events in which they took place. And Rashi says, no. In fact, these first 12 verses, if you will, in chapter 24 is actually a flashback to days before the giving of Torah. He's saying that these events that are being described in these first 12 verses of chapter 24 occur, if you will, 3 days before the giving of the 10 commandments. So what exactly are these rules and laws that are being spoken by Moses to the Israelite people during these first several verses in chapter 24? If they're not of the 10 commandments, what are they? And what could they be if there are things that Moses is saying before the giving of the 10 commandments? What was he telling them? What kind of laws and ordinances was he telling them about before the giving of the 10 commandments? So this is number 2. Again, this is Rashi, because he's again picking up from this beginning of chapter 24. Verse 3 says, Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of Adonai and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice, saying, all the things that God has commanded, we will do. So what are these commands and rules and laws that Moses is sharing, apparently prior to the giving of the 10 commandments? So this is what Rashi says. All the laws refers to the 7 Noahide laws and others that were given to them at Marah. The Noahide laws, in Jewish tradition, these are laws that were given to all humanity. They are some of the basic, what we might call the natural laws of constituting any civil society. Don't murder, don't steal, don't commit certain abhorrent sexual practices. These are supposed to be universal laws that are expected of any civilized community, not specifically the Jewish people. So Rashi is saying, what in effect Moses is presenting and reading to the Jewish people at this point, to the Israelites, are this preceding set of laws that were universal, that were applicable to all civil society. And then number 3 on the study sheet, the very next verse says, and Moses wrote all the words of God, all the words of God. Rashi says, what this means is Moses wrote down the whole story of the world, from creation to the giving of Torah. So what here Rashi is saying is what he is now telling the people is the entire story leading up to this very moment. So what is Rashi getting at here? He seems to be hinting that if all this is happening prior to the giving of the Ten Commandments, that there's a need for, in a sense, a review of the entire story of the world leading up to this moment, a review of those basic laws that are applicable to every civil society, and that there's a need when the people say everything that God has said we're going to do, that there's some kind of need for an affirmation of what has been done before, of the entire story of humanity up to this moment, an affirmation of this other covenant, if you will, this Noahide covenant, an affirmation of all that as a precondition to hearing and embracing something new, something that goes beyond this preceding and more generalized covenant. So this is kind of shocking, the notion that, well, let's see here. We're going to look at this notion about how this affirmation of what has happened before, an embrace of what has happened before, is in a sense, a precondition to revelation at Mount Sinai. We're going to take a look at a commentary from Meor Vashemesh, Light and Sun. This is a collection of writings by one of the great Kabbalist and Hasidic leaders, Rabbi Kalanimus Kalman Epstein. He lived from about 1753 to about 1823 in Poland. And from his work, Meor Vashemesh, we read this. How can the moment of arrival in the wilderness, a moment before Torah was given, serve as a paradigm of the eternal freshness of the words of Torah? Before the process of revelation begins, there is a spontaneous understanding that their relation to law has been inadequate. There is a resolve to imbue old forms with new meanings as the expression of God's will. They realize they have done nothing, for all was habit and convention. What Rabbi Kalanimus Kalman Epstein seems to be saying here is up to this moment, prior to the revelation of the Ten Commandments, the people have been following this basic set of rules, the Noahide laws, if you will, and that they reach this moment of recognizing the insufficiency of them, that they are not enough. And not only that, but they realize that all they've been doing has been acts of mere obedience, following these laws. And this moment of revelation is Mount Sinai. This Hasidic rabbi is hinting at, requires something more than mere obedience. Something more is going to be expected of them. And we've actually played around with this notion in previous studies, where we've talked about how the exodus from Egypt was not merely about escaping from slavery. It was not merely about entering into freedom. That what was really about was entering into the dimension of responsibility and self-governance. And that's what caused the people to tremble so much, to realize they had this capacity and was being asked of them to fulfill that capacity for greater responsibility and self-regulation. So let's turn over on the study sheet. And we're going to explore this fascinating phrase that appears at verse 7 of chapter 24, where the people say, all that God has spoken, we shall do and we shall hear. The Mayor of Hashemish, and perhaps Rashi himself as well, are hinting that Torah comes in response to a human readiness for a revisioning of culture. And in a sense, if we look back on what has preceded this moment into other stories in earlier portions of our Torah, we see that God appears to people when they are ready, if you will, to take the next step. We think about when God appeared to Abraham. At least in our midrash, the various midrashim, imagine that the reason that God appears to Abraham, speaks to Abraham, is because Abraham was wondering about the universe, was dissatisfied with the way things were going, wondered how could things be burning up? How could things be falling apart? Surely there was someone who created all of this and must desire to see it preserved. And it's in response to that inquisitiveness, that recognition that something needed to be done to save the world. That's when God appears to Abraham. We read at the very beginning of the book of Exodus that God finally responds after hundreds of years of Israelite slavery. God responds to the Israelites once they begin to moan and groan, and if you will, express a sense that we will not take this anymore. And in response to that readiness to shed slavery, to shed their acceptance of this confinement, that's when God appears to them and is ready to empower them. And we read also at the very beginning of Exodus, when does God appear to Moses? God appears to Moses when Moses stops and looks at this burning bush, and in a sense has a sense of stopping everything and with a sense of curiosity, but how could this bush not be consumed? And it's in response to that willingness to stop and examine and have a curiosity about the world that God then says, you're the one who's going to free the Israelite people. So all of this is leading up to this moment of the revelation at Sinai. I think this is where our commentators are taking us, that the reason revelation happens at Sinai is not just because God says, oh, I have it on my schedule that I'm going to present 10 commandments, some laws to the Israelite people. It's not just because God wants to now have the Israelite people worship God and become, in a sense, no longer in service to Pharaoh, but now in service to God. No, it's because the people have become aware of the limitations of their paradigm within which they've been living. And more, they say, in a sense, they expect more is required of us, and how we've been living is insufficient. And it's in response to that recognition of the insufficiency of how they've been living, the limitations of mere obedience, that God says, now you're ready for the next step. And the next step is this awesome responsibility for self-government and responsibility. So here in number 6, in a sense, let me do it back up to number 5. All that God has spoken, we shall do and we shall hear. So now they're going beyond the mere doing and adding something called hearing. And the hearing is something about going beyond mere doing, mere obedience. It has to do with some level of initiation, of innovation, of creativity, of thoughtfulness, of expanding beyond what has already been told to them. So this is what this commentary is leading us towards, that the people are now ready to go beyond mere passive obedience to something more initiative and innovate. That's what the hearing represents. Let's look and see what Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav says about it. Number 6. Naaseh, we shall do, refers to the revealed. That is to the commandment that one can fulfill on one's own. Nishma, we shall hear. This refers to the hidden. That is to things that one cannot quite grasp. For around each commandment, there are other things which belong to the class of the hidden. Rabbi Nachman, one of the great Hasidic rabbis, is describing here a dynamic, if you will, a dynamic in which we become aware. We have first a revealed dimension, things that we're told that we need to do, things that are clear that are expected of us, but that there's another dimension, a hidden dimension. And it's the exploration of that hidden dimension, which is part of our responsibility and our initiative. And once we begin to delve into that hidden dimension, we then reveal that. We discover something. And the discovery of that revealed dimension, if you will, just raises up yet another hidden dimension. So it's this ongoing, nothing's ever done. It's this ongoing dynamic of what's revealed and what's hidden. When you explore what's mysterious and unknown to you, what you haven't quite accessed yet, once you get there, then that becomes revealed, and that reveals yet, that points you in the direction of yet another layer of hiddenness. So it's this ongoing process. So here is a little bit of Midrash from Midrash Tanhuma that we're going to conclude with, number 7. Rabbi Yochanan said, anyone who makes true meaning of Torah, it is as though he made himself, as it is said, God commanded me at that time to teach you the statutes and laws, to do them, la'asot dechem otam, from Deuteronomy. It does not say la'asot otam, to do them, but la'asot dechem atem, to make yourselves. So this Midrash is playing with the actual Hebrew and saying, if you read the Hebrew carefully, what you'll see there is, it's not saying you should do them, but you should do yourself or make yourself. And the Midrash concludes, from here we learn it as though one has made and created oneself. Torah is not merely about receiving a set of rules that we are to obey and do. Receiving Torah has to do with, if you will, a self-realization of oneself, an actualization of oneself. So perhaps from the Hasidic perspective, we might say this notion about imbuing old forms with new meaning is not merely about the external things that we receive, like paradigms or regulations or culture. It's also about us. We ourselves are a form. And what Torah is really all about is to imbue oneself with new meaning, to take this form and bring out something deep within ourselves that we have yet to actualize. So that's the challenge to the Israelites. That's before them at this moment. It's a challenge to each one of us every day, if we're ready to commit ourselves to imbue our lives with new meaning. With that, I'd love to hear what everyone has thought about this rich story that we're in the middle of, this Parshat Mishpatim, the presentation of rules and regulations. What jumped out at you?
I'll jump in.
Yes, Gary, please. Thank you so much.
So in my quest to continue to try to be a good person, I try to look for my humanity. And there's a line early in, I jotted down, it said, nor shall you show deference to the poor in a dispute. So trying to be a good guy and find my humanity, I generally will find I want to defer to the poor. But Torah says, no. If the poor has done something wrong, you can't defer to him. I mean, there's right and wrong. And so it's a balancing act between having that humanity and trying to help others, but you still have to do the right thing. So it just spoke to me. It just spoke out, that line.
When it spoke to you, did it speak to you in a way that was startling or a way that felt very natural and comfortable?
Well, it feels like the right thing, but it's not natural and comfortable, because the natural, depending on the situation, you want to help the downtrodden, you want to help the poor. But if they're in a dispute, if the poor person has done something wrong, Torah says no. If they're in the wrong, you can't defer to them. And so it makes good sense. It sounds logical. It's just that trying to find your humanity sometimes, for me, you want to help that person. Right. So it's sort of how it ended, where you said Torah is asking us to find the right thing to do, and it's not just words; it's action. So. It's just not easy.
I think it's beautiful that you picked on that particular section, Gary. So let me ask Richard, go ahead.
I just wondered if that's a line you're pulling out, is it saying that shall not defer to the poor because they're poor, or does it say not just because they're the poor, but you should hold them equal to the standard and not defer simply out of their poverty?
I'm trying to find where it is to read what about. I didn't make a note of the.
Well, I think I'm looking in particular at the beginning of chapter 23. You must not carry false rumors. You shall not join hands with the guilty to act as a malicious witness. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in dispute so as to pervert in favor of the mighty, nor shall you show deference to a poor person in his dispute.
Right. They should be judged equally based on the behavior, not on their status.
Yeah.
Does that help you?
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I'm not arguing, and I agree, and it makes sense. And right. I think that's why in this country we put the blinders on. You know, justice is blind, meaning justice doesn't look at the person. But
except in Virginia City.
Well, but the thing is that in reality, we generally know who we're talking to. And this is specifically talking about a legal issue. I'm taking it to the next level. Maybe it's not a legal issue. Maybe it's just day-to-day living and you're trying to help someone. But Torah is saying that you can't take a person's poverty. Depending on the circumstances, we must be treated equally.
Yes.
And it's easier said than done, is
yes.
kind of what I'm hearing Gary saying as well, right? That you want to live according to this principle that everyone should be treated and judged equally. But it's hard, especially if you know someone or you see someone coming in nice clothes and someone coming in kind of all in ragtags and their court papers are just spilling out all over the floor, as opposed to someone who's got it all nice and neat in a binder and seems to be well organized. It can be hard. Richard, if you want to finish.
Yes, you brought up an interesting word, principle. And in my text, it says norm. In your text, it says rules or rules. And you've pointed out that they don't go up to the mountain and get the 10 commandments, which may be the embodiment of the true principles that we're trying to get enacted, not just going by customs. maybe that's the shift. And indeed, there's a point at which a child will learn to say, that's not fair. Well, it's the rule, but it's not fair. And there's a point at which they move from concrete thinking to abstract thinking. And we try to uncover the principles of democracy or fairness or whatever it is. And that takes a long thing, hard to do, especially if you're a slave and there's no way to give freedom of voice to enact new rules or new understandings. And I think that we're being offered at Sinai is, okay, these are all the norms you've had. And I didn't like that stuff about slaves at all and selling your wife away. But when it says you shouldn't be bad to a stranger. And if you harm a stranger, I'll take you to the sword. And if you hurt the widow and the orphan, and every time you kill somebody in war, you're making another widow and more orphans. And how does humanity get beyond that point? How do they begin doing something other than having one tribe or one group's rules of how we hang together to do our little thing? How do we get to a point where we see humanity and everyone to get beyond the norm for our particular bailiwick and to principled behavior in the world? And that's what I think the revelation is about. And we're still, like you say, Rabbi, we're still trying to figure that out, and how to become the self. The self is, he says, he makes himself, God makes himself, he makes us in his image. But if we pull our egos to the side and join with him, then we can enact those principles. And we need to keep internalizing these rules and behaviors so that we can then actually act as his conduit in the world. And I think that's the beginning at Sinai. And we got a long way to go to actually have principled behavior. And our society is now really struggling with that. And we know they're going to vote one way or the other tomorrow, and we'll go up and down and up and down. And okay, I've said enough.
Thank you, Richard. Others want to speak about this point in particular or share anything else? Sherry,
are you asking me, Rabbi?
Sherry, did you have something you'd like to share?
Well, I haven't been in the group, so, I don't know sort of the lay of the land, so to speak. And I'm in a Torah study with Beth Israel. I'm Reformed. So, and this study is a little bit different than what I'm used to. I look at all of these texts, and I ask myself, how does this apply to myself? How does this apply to the world we live in now? And I don't have any clear guidance, really.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. Did you say something more?
Well, I was going to say, someone picked out the deference to the poor in this dispute. I tend to not make an excuse for, but take into account whatever someone's life experience is, and it's in many ways unfair to judge someone who has had very few advantages in life and hold them to the same standards as someone who's had every single advantage there is. And I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that and then, of course, poor could also be a metaphor for other things. For example, having a disability, a person that is limited in some way, that maybe doesn't excuse, but certainly gives reason to consider their point of view in a dispute.
The whole notion about judging and dealing with disputes takes up an enormous amount of space within the Talmud. It's fascinating to start to pursue some of these lines of thinking. And I'll come back to a point that you just made in a second, but let me ask Mark Thompson, would you like to share something? And you'll have to unmute, Mark. Go ahead and unmute.
I've always been intrigued by the position of Na'aseh v'nishma. This is a discussion that I've often heard in Torah study. And before it always was, well, you have to do it. If you may not understand why you're supposed to be doing this, but do it anyway. And then eventually you'll figure out why you're obeying the commandment. This is the first time I've heard the Rabbi Nachman explanation that there's another way of looking at this, that these are things that are hidden, which then brought me to your paragraph 4, which I loved. How can the moment of arrival in the wilderness, a moment before Torah was given, serve as a paradigm of the eternal freshness of the words of Torah? And it just occurred to me that, well, at the very end, and they realized that they had nothing at all was habit at convention. They needed to be in the desert. They needed to be in the wilderness to have this paradigm shift. So I'm drawing a connection then. That which was hidden was then revealed once they got to the wilderness. They did it, they got there, and now they have to understand why they're there and what they have to learn from that. To me, that's another explanation of Na'aseh v'nishma.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And Jay, either?
Yes, I'll try to be brief. First of all, I noticed that these are people who are in the desert, and Moses is going to leave them for a while. And he says, wait here for us until we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone who has a legal matter approach them. The civilization, the need for order, and the need for resolution of disputes to keep people from arbitrarily taking from each other and killing from each other is paramount. I noticed by reading all of these names and things through Genesis and Exodus, and knowing that our president, because presidents are in the vogue at the moment, Abraham Lincoln sat by the fire, as we hear, and he read in his log cabin. But the names of those people that emigrated from the East into the great manifest destiny West had biblical names, which we've read, Abraham himself. And I read the mission statement from the Veterans Administration: to fulfill President Lincoln's promise to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan, by serving and honoring the men and women who are America's veterans. These men read these words. These men knew that America was a wilderness, and that it was a challenging place, and that there had to be laws and order in order to bring them to some type of resolution of the disputes and to move ahead with it. And when you read this, you see that and also, I just wanted to also add that if anyone is keeping track, Chabad does keep track, and it says that the also included are laws warning against mistreatment of foreigners, season festival, agricultural. There are 53 mitzvot in this parsha, 23 imperative commandments and 30 prohibitions. So if you're keeping track, Chabad has 53 in this one. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. And others, David, go ahead and unmute. Yeah.
Also, Susan has a comment. On Maaseh, I'll stumble over my Hebrew. On we will listen. First we will do, and then we will listen. Just riffing on that a little more. I'm reading Richard Elliott Friedman's translation, and his comment on that is based on Rashban, and I think it's maybe underneath what Rabbi Nachman said, not in the sense of, I think it's something that Rabbi Nachman may have built on, but it's something I never thought of before, which is, we will do, we got all these rules, we're going to do them. We will listen means in the future, our ears will be open for what you may say to us in the future. It's an ongoing process of having our ears open and listening. And then Nachman goes on to say, and what you're going to get is the mystery stuff.
Thank you, Dave. And Susan.
And what I had to say was something similar, that by you shall listen, it's not, if you listen deeply, every time you listen, you'll probably hear something different, something maybe more, maybe just something different. So, you know, that the rules are maybe there to guide us, but we have to be able to interpret them in order to live our lives fully and honestly and in Torah, to bring God closer, so that each time we encounter a different situation, we have to again listen.
Nice, very nice. So I'm going to respond to what a number of you have said. I'm going to respond perhaps most directly to something that Sherry said, which has to do with the what we call the 10 Commandments, which we read about in last week's Torah portion. And what we didn't focus on it when we studied it last week. But what's interesting is the text itself doesn't use the word commandments when it's talking about what happened there at Mount Sinai. It doesn't use the word mitzvot. It doesn't say the 10 mitzvot. It says the 10 devarim, the 10 words, the 10 matters, the 10 utterances. And so in Kabbalah, this notion about 10 is very significant, because the 10 utterances we tie back to the story of creation itself, because there were 10 times where the text says, and God said, let there be light, let the waters above be separated from the waters below, and so forth. So there are 10 times when God uttered and things happened, came into existence. And of course, in Kabbalah, the notion of the 10 Sefirot, these emanations of the divine that enter into this dimension and infuse all of us. So in that sense, this notion about 10 devarim, 10 utterances, is really in Kabbalah what happens at Mount Sinai, is this new, if you will, infusion of creative energy and power pouring into the Israelites there at Mount Sinai. And when that happens, it's very different than, let's say, in medieval times when a sovereign would have nailed to a tree or to a door the proclamations of the king. This is what you shall do, and this is what is forbidden. And therefore, you better obey it, or you're going to have your head chopped off. That's not what's happening, at least in this framework, this tradition within Judaism. What's happening here is the awesome, creative, procreative power of the universe is pouring into this dimension, pouring into the Israelites. And in a sense, that's what's causing them to tremble. The notion, we have this power too. We share this power. And now they're being asked to use it wisely, to use it in a way that will preserve and promote life, preserve and promote civil society, that will be based upon a covenantal relationship, not only between the people and God, but among the people themselves. And that's why Margot sent me this lovely article by this scholar, Leon Cass, that was published in the Wall Street Journal, that talks about the impact that this story has on the founding of this country. And it's also detailed out in Bruce Feiler's beautiful book about the impact of the Israelite story, the Hebrew story, on the founding of this country. Because what's happening at Sinai is the message. You were once slaves, and now you're free. And what freedom means is enhanced responsibility for the world. That's what freedom means. And that's what this country was founded on. This country was founded on, you're no longer to be subject to a king. You're now in covenant with one another to create a better civil society that frees everyone. And by freeing everyone, what we mean is unleashing your human potential into the world. That's what this country was founded on. And so that's why this story resonates so profoundly within this nation in particular. So it's my hope and prayers for all of us that we will continue to search for the hidden dimensions within us, which are deep and profound and procreative and creative, and bring them out into the world and continue the covenantal relationships we have with one another, and know that there's always higher and always better. Bless you all. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you all very much for studying. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shalom.
Big COVID hug.
Okay. Be well.
COVID hugs, virtual hugs.